Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Okay, I have had an interesting week. And one of the things that has happened, even though we're only on Wednesday of the week, is I've had a couple of calls from HR folks who are very worried because they did something that they know wasn't right, but they don't know how to fix it. So let me give you some background. In both of these situations, the HR folks were told by management to terminate somebody. And both of the reasons for termination were specious, right? They just didn't make a lot of sense. And the HR person in both of the situations suspected that there was an improper reason for terminating this person. They didn't have a choice. You know, the leaders said fire them. They processed the termination. They processed final pay. They did everything they needed to do. But they're upset about it because they don't feel like it was the right thing to do. And they feel like maybe they didn't demonstrate integrity by standing up enough. And it gave me the idea to actually talk about that issue today during the podcast, because I think it is a true challenge for human resources professionals. Again, some of you are EEO officers with the state of California or other municipalities. Some of you are employment lawyers. Some of you are labor relations officers, or you work in union workplaces. But I'm just going to lump that all into HR, okay? It is very challenging when you're in HR and your job is compliance, right? Your job is to make sure that your employer is doing what they're supposed to be doing and that they're treating employees fairly and they're giving them equal access and equal opportunity. When that is your job, and then you are asked to make a decision or directed to make a decision that you think is unfair or illegal or inappropriate. Now, obviously, this is a very personal issue for each of us. You know, when do you decide the line is too big to be crossed, right? When do you decide that you just can't continue working for an organization that is asking you to do something that you don't believe in? But you also have to be pragmatic and understand that there may be lots of things you disagree with as an HR professional. That doesn't mean you quit your job, right? What you really want to do is make sure that you have given managers and supervisors and leaders the right information. You've given them solid guidance. You've explained to them the pros and cons of the situation. And then they make their decision that they're going to make, right? You can make sure that every decision you make is accurate and has integrity and is made for the right reason, but you can't dictate that for everyone else. And I think many times HR professionals can have a huge impact, positive impact on the workplace by not just throwing up their hands and saying, I can't support this, I'm out, but really educating the team on, okay, well, this is why I disagreed. And I understand if you're going to do what you're going to do, that's fine. Of course, you're also going to document it, right? Because one of the things that's very important in HR is to make sure that you're documenting the advice that you're giving. I take emails. I type emails of every call I have with a client. It's our way of recording what happened with the client. So as I'm on the phone, I'm typing and I type what they told me and what I told them, and it goes into their file in case there's ever a question or they call later about a situation and I think, oh yeah, I think I've talked to them about something similar. I can go back and find those notes. That documentation is important because I document what I said and what they said, right? And then what did we decide to do? That's what you're going to do in HR. You always want to have your little notebook, the apps on your phone that allow you to record notes. And I don't mean audio record, but write your notes. Whatever process you're using, whatever tool you choose, you want to make sure you have a way to document what you have said and the advice you have given. And many times we do that in emails, as we discussed today, here's what I'm suggesting. There are other ways to do it. Just do it, right? Because the bottom line is it's not only for defensive purposes of showing that you gave the right advice. It's also to remind you about a situation that could come back, months or years later, and you're not going to remember all the details. So if you've got documentation there, it can help you figure out, okay, why did I give that advice in that situation? So the documentation is critical. Related to that is your ability to be persuasive with the leaders when there is an actual legal issue. Now, remember, there's a big difference between something violating the law and you thinking something is not a best practice, okay? When I give advice to clients, I deal with both of those. This is what the law requires. This is what the best practice would be in this situation. I think it's important for them to have both of those things. Because even if they don't violate the law, if something isn't a best practice or there's a risk to it, that's something I want the client to make sure they understand. So many times we get overly invested in our advice, right? So whether you're giving advice to a client internally or externally, you often feel very connected to that idea of the advice you're giving, right? Your values are really part of what you're telling that individual or that company to do. So when they tell you, thanks for sharing, we're not going to do it, it can be hard to let that go. But if you're going to be successful in HR, you have to be able to distinguish between those situations when you are dealing with a legal compliance issue where you literally have to say to them, I'm not going to do that because that's illegal, right? And, if you're going to make me do that, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to make a complaint. I'm going to have to do something. And somebody just doing something in a way that you think could be done better or taking steps that you don't think are the best steps to take. If you just leave and throw up your hands every time that happens, you'll never be able to stay at a job and you'll never have impact, right? You'll never be able to actually impact the culture and what is going on in terms of decisions that are being made in the organization. So integrity is not always easy, right? It's easy to just say, well, they told me what to do and I did it. What's harder is really evaluating, look, is this the right thing to do? Can I live with this? Am I comfortable with this? And if you're not, you have options. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that your employer did anything wrong, right? Just because you're not comfortable with an action that they're going to take doesn't necessarily mean that they've done anything wrong. You're just not comfortable with it. You don't like it. You disagree with it, all of which is very valid. But if you're going to be effective in HR, you have to be able to distinguish between those situations, like I said, that are legally a problem and the situations that you just disagree with. And the way to really think about it is if you put yourself in the position of having to defend what the employer is doing, you're having your deposition taken, you're testifying at trial, you're testifying at some sort of a hearing, and you have to explain what happened. Is there an explanation, even though you might not agree with it, right? Was there a potentially legitimate reason for doing what they're doing? Or are you in a situation where you literally have to say, look, if we're going to do this, we're going to violate the law and I'm not going to be part of that. And there are people who have had to quit their jobs because they've told management, I can't do that. I feel like that doesn't comply with the law and I can't be part of that. And management tells them to do it anyway and they leave, right? Because they can't be part of that. Nobody says that is easy, but you have to do what you can live with, right? You have to be able to do actions that are consistent with your values and are consistent with what you are willing to do as a person, as an individual, not just in your role in HR. So very important to understand that having integrity in HR is not just about decisions. It's also about everything you say and do. You can't exaggerate. You can't embellish. You can't make broad, sweeping generalizations that are not really accurate. You're going to be held accountable as a spokesperson for the employer anytime you make representations or comments or you take actions that you say are driven by the employer. So you have to be very careful. And one of the things I always tell HR folks is just assume you're being recorded, right? Because you might be. So always assume that, you've got 10 people in front of you watching what you're doing and evaluating what you're doing, and they may be recording what you're saying and doing. So as an HR leader, your integrity is critical. We all know that intellectually. Sometimes situations and facts make that difficult. We may be tempted to give a special employee, someone who we particularly like, a little extra help, a little extra benefit. And we all know intellectually that we cannot do that. But that doesn't mean it's easy to make that decision. So I want to encourage you as HR professionals, don't be so hard on yourselves. Take a step back. Think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. If it is just an issue of best practices or something that you just disagree with, think about how important that issue is to you and take appropriate action. But if it is a legal problem, if it is an issue where you just feel like you can't do that you can't be somebody with honesty and integrity if you take that action, then you've got to speak up. You either speak up or you leave, right? And neither one of those are necessarily easy to do. But I think in HR, we sometimes forget that we have options and we have the ability to really turn other people around if we've established that relationship with them where they can trust us. And so when we say to them, yeah, you could do that, but it's going to violate this law, and these are the consequences of that. So you have to decide, management, whether you want to do that. The more direct and the more you can speak with authority, the more effective you're going to be. So it's just one of those things about being an HR professional that can be tricky and it can be hard. But as we always say, we can do hard things. Okay? Don't feel like you have to just be the yes person because you're in HR. That is not most of the time what management wants. Management wants an HR professional who will think for themselves, who will recommend appropriate action, who will be able to exercise good judgment, exercise discretion. All of those characteristics and all of those abilities are part of having integrity as an HR professional. So I know it isn't easy, but you all do a wonderful job. Keep up the good work. And just remember to draw that line when you need to draw that line and figure out how to get people on the other side of that line to your side. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.